Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Unrestricted Sports. Today's topic is a little bit similar to our last episode. We talked about our top 5 current QBs. This is our top 5 QBs of all time. So to start right off, I'm just going to read my list right now. Number 1, Tom Brady. I think this is, pretty self-explanatory. You have to look at what he's done in terms of on the field, his off the field and on the field leadership, and the fact that I don't think there's a single player from any one of his teams that has ever actually said anything bad about him. Combine that with the fact that he won 6 Super Bowls with minimal offensive help in terms of never really playing with top wide receiver options, except for like the 1 year of Randy Moss or the couple years of Randy Moss, and having Gronkowski. Those were really his security blanket guys. And he always made everyone around him better. So I think that's clear cut. Even though he beat Montana in terms of rings with 28-3, what really sold the 28-3 was that it was 28-3 and he still won. And after that, it was pretty much it's undisputed at that point. I think for most people, I don't think anyone can really argue it sensibly at this point for Tom Brady to be number 1. That being said, my number 2 is Joe Montana. Pretty obvious. He was considered the GOAT by basically everybody. I would say everybody before Tom came around and, basically broke his Super Bowl records and everything like that. Montana was a really good quarterback. You have to look at what he did across 2 teams. He won 4 Super Bowls with the 49ers, and then he went on to take the Chiefs to the AFC Championship game. That's a pretty good quarterback. And he took the Chiefs to the AFC Championship game in the very late end of his career, and he was still a good quarterback. So that's my number 2 spot. Nolan, do you have any comments on the first 2? Or
Yes, I agree with you on the number 1, Tom Brady, undisputed greatest quarterback of all time. Talked about it in the last episode for a few minutes, several minutes actually, but spectacular leader. 6 Super Bowl rings. That's crazy. 70,000 passing yards, 1,000 rushing. 4 Super Bowls, MVPs, 3 real MVPs, regular season. Obviously makes the Pro Bowl. Doesn't play in it a lot. He doesn't fumble the ball much. But yeah, Tom Brady, greatest of all time. The number 2 spot is where we disagree.
Oh, really?
So, Joe Montana, he's on my list. Great quarterback. I see the argument for him being the greatest, but I think a very slept-on quarterback is one that not many people know about. Personally, I don't know much about him besides, what stats tell me. But Johnny Unitas, he won the same amount of Super Bowls. Okay, championships, I'll say, because technically Super Bowls weren't really a thing. But he won 1 Super Bowl, 3 NFL championships. Obviously, he had a lower completion percentage, touchdown-interception ratio. He had 3 MVPs, which is more than Montana, same as Brady. He had over 50% passing for over 40,000 passing yards. He had 3 seasons with over 3,000 yards. He had 27 games where he threw for over 300 yards. And he threw 29 touchdowns in a season. Back in his day, that's pretty spectacular.
What Montana did for his day was pretty spectacular too, and a lot of people considered him way better than they ever considered Johnny to be.
Here's the thing, though. You can't compare Johnny Unitas playing in Montana's era and Montana in Unitas' era because completely different styles of play, obviously. Very, relatively run heavy back in the day when Johnny Unitas was playing. But you look in Joe Montana's era and you see other great quarterbacks. You look in Unitas' era and you're like, damn, quarterbacks? What the hell is that position, You don't really...
Yeah, but he wasn't greater. He didn't win more than Montana did. And he wasn't...
How so?
I would say he wasn't
win in what aspect?
In terms of winning Super Bowls. That's the ultimate goal right there.
He won... Okay. Johnny Unitas...
Didn't he have 1 more MVP than Montana?
Johnny Unitas had 1 Super Bowl ring. That's because he only played in the league for a very limited amount of time when the Super Bowl was a thing. So if his 3 NFL championships, which is basically a Super Bowl, if you compare it to today's game, this is where it kind of gets confusing. But he essentially has 4 Super Bowl rings, which ties Montana.
But that's saying that he would have beat the other division in the game. We don't know that. We can only judge it based on
which is why you can't compare their eras. They had the same amount of MVPs. I mean, Montana beats
Montana had
beats
4
Unitas
Super Bowl
out
rings.
in. Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
So he would have had the same as Johnny did.
But in a pass or run heavy offense like Unitas, that's pretty impressive.
This wasn't some sort of big difference between Montana's era and Johnny's era. The Montana grew up in what is still a very rough period for quarterbacks.
See what pins me on Unitas being
to put this in perspective, Tom Brady grew up watching Montana.
To put this in perspective, though, Unitas, obviously Joe Montana, spectacular quarterback, like I said.
Tom Brady,
but Johnny Unitas, dude, was consistently throughout his entire 18-year career, consistently a good quarterback. Granted, different times, so it's tough, really tough, to compare Unitas to Montana, Montana to Brady, etc.
No, it's not. It is not.
Dude, you can't. You said it yourself.
Montana and Johnny both played in eras that were incredibly violent towards the quarterback.
That's fair. But Johnny Unitas played in a very run-heavy NFL. And he still amassed a spectacular amount of passing yards, touchdowns. He had spectacular seasons.
But stats are only part of the greatness. Stats are like the fries that come with the cheeseburger. If you don't win Super Bowls, no one just wants fries. They want something to go with it. Stats are just fries. They're a nice bonus, but if you don't have a cheeseburger to chomp into, you're not going to be full off of a small fry.
How many MVPs did Joe Montana win? 3, right?
I believe it was 3. It might have been.
Okay, so Johnny had the same. Yeah, Johnny had the same amount as Joe Montana. I respect having Joe Montana at 2. That's why I have Joe Montana at 3. The only reason I put Johnny Unitas above him was he has a marginally less TD to interception ratio, and he's proven consistency. Joe Montana, spectacular quarterback. You can't discredit it. But that's what set it aside for me.
My main thing is that it was near. It was as near as you could get to 100% consensus before Tom Brady became who he was today. Back when it was just Montana that we had in this little debate. It really was that Joe Montana was the consensus GOAT. And no one would have said Johnny.
See,
as good as he was, no one would have said it.
That's the thing. I think, yes, before Tom Brady came around, Joe Montana, undisputed GOAT. But with Tom Brady around, I think that shifts things around. I think Johnny Unitas, in a like I've been saying, a very run-first era, he passed over 40,000 yards, and that was when passing in the NFL was relatively difficult. But when the NFL made it easier for wide receivers to score, he held the NFL record for touchdown passes. He had 47 consecutive touchdown passes. He carved his way to the Hall of Fame.
Well, no one's debating that he's a Hall of Famer. All these guys are going to be Hall of Famers.
Who do you think the influence was for throwing styles? Like quarterbacks like Dan Marino and Dan Fouts.
But that's like saying that's like saying that the Greek city-states laid the foundations for what Rome would model themselves as. Of course, they modeled themselves after something that they saw being inefficiently deployed and made it even better. But that doesn't mean that the inefficiencies in the Greek system were it's the same thing. Like the inefficiencies with Johnny, other teams and quarterbacks took that and made it better.
See,
that's how I look.
This is why I don't like the term greatest of all time. because there's so many eras to football, and what's expected between eras is so different that numbers can be so. Dude, but think about it. Joe Montana. Okay, here I'll say it like this: most modern quarterbacks can do what Johnny Unitas did, no question. It's not that hard to hand the ball off, but Johnny Unitas, what he did to improve the quarterback game for the future of quarterbacks is stellar. Johnny
so
Unitas
you're more saying that it's
made the
his
passing
impact
game.
on the sport.
Correct.
All right, so you okay? I think I can kind of see where you're coming from. Where
I mean, dude,
Joe Montana was the GOAT before, but once Brady came in, it kind of changed the perspective because that kind of shakes things up a bit. When
I mean, Johnny Unitas wasn't an elite passer. I mean, if he was going to throw a football, it was heads or tails. The receiver catches it.
yeah,
But his influence on Joe Montana, Peyton Manning, Dan Marino, Tom Brady, even everybody learned from someone, and for me, that starts with Johnny Unitas. And I think.
All right, so so would you say that if Tom Brady had never existed, that Joe Montana would be the GOAT, though? Since that seems to be your argument, that if Brady wasn't the GOAT, that Montana still would be.
Yes.
Okay.
And if Brady hadn't won like any Super Bowls, I would have Joe Montana at 1 and Tom Brady at 3.
Fair enough.
Anyways, my 3 is Joe Montana. Same reasons as you. Good quarterback, high QBR, yada yada yada.
My third on my all-time list. I should point out right now I don't have Johnny on my top 5 all-time.
That's fair.
That's still because whereas I can see your point, I just think that there's more to it than just saying it was a different era.
Right.
Because in football, I don't think that the eras are too different, except when you look at stuff like that didn't really impact the game itself very much, like when you have the NFL merger. But besides that, the eras are relatively similar. The era that we're in right now that started a couple years ago, really, I still don't think will have very much effect on how we view the past quarterbacks. Because football is a very slow-moving game to change. So I think that the records for everything is going to stay. Most people are not going to be like, oh, well, different era, it's impossible to tell. Like at basketball, different era really does matter. But in football, I feel like it is so slow-moving in terms of changes that it's not really a factor for me. But I can see where you're coming from. But so that's just to point out that Johnny isn't on my list. And to kind of explain that. For my number 3, I have Peyton Manning. And this is I kind of debated putting Peyton Manning above Joe Montana, but the thing for me is that Manning didn't reach the levels of success that Montana reached in terms of winning Super Bowls. Manning had a great career. His stats were very, very good. He won a couple Super Bowls, helped revive a dead Broncos franchise, made them relevant, became the face of that franchise.
Defense.
For the year that they won the Super Bowl, yes, I would still say that he did his job in getting that Super Bowl. He wasn't the biggest factor, I would agree.
And remind me who the Broncos played again.
For some reason I can't. Oh, I do have to point this out. His first year he was with the Broncos, Peyton Manning was an unstoppable. Well, it wasn't unstoppable, but he was an offensive powerhouse. He did really good offensively that first season. And correct me if I'm wrong, but that team went to the Super Bowl and played the Seahawks, right?
Yeah, but they got blown out.
Yeah, but they were still a good team all the way until that point. So I'd say he did do his job to get them to 2 Super Bowls. The first year more so than the second year, but he did still do his part. And honestly, if the Colts were a better team, because keep in mind who they've had for their last 2 quarterbacks before all this stuff started happening. They went from Peyton Manning to Andrew Luck and won they didn't win. I mean, they kind of underused their talent. They didn't win a Super Bowl with Andrew Luck, and I state that they underperformed, even though they did very well with Peyton Manning. They still underperformed.
I think if Cam Newton jumps on that fumble, the Panthers win that game.
Oh, 100%.
That's not to take away from Manning's greatness. I had Manning at 4.
No, it's not to take away from the accomplishments of the. It's not to take away from the Broncos' accomplishments either. It's just to say that, this is a whole different discussion. There's a reason why Cam still gets a bad rap for not jumping on that fumble, because he made an active choice to protect himself rather than. And this wasn't a guarantee that he was going to even get hurt. It was just that he was going to get tackled. There's no guarantee. There's no guarantee that you're not going to get hurt, but there's also not a guarantee that you're going to. There's no guarantee that you're not going to get hurt, but there's also not a guarantee that you will. There's a chance. Yeah, there's a chance you'll get hurt. There's a chance you won't, and that's why it was so heavily scrutinized, because he actively chose to, in the biggest game that in any sport, I will maintain it is the biggest game in any sport, the Super Bowl. He was not willing to take a risk that wasn't, a passing decision, but a decision to protect himself against a theoretical situation that may not even occur, wasn't even likely to occur. And I think that's why he gets a bad rep. And that's, once again, that's not to take away from what the Broncos did. They won that game. That's part of the sport, is that sometimes people make bad decisions.
I think
so. I will say that
the greatest.
You go ahead.
I think Peyton Manning is a part of what I can think of. You might have another thing that I can't think about right now, but I think Peyton Manning is one half of the greatest quarterback wide receiver combo of all time. Peyton Manning and Marvin Harrison. You cannot. It was
one of the greatest wide receiver quarterback pairings.
That's fair. Yeah.
Tom Brady and Randy Moss was the greatest.
I think the only reason Peyton Manning didn't have more Super Bowls
was because of Tom Brady.
I think it was Tom Brady, but also the things around him. He never had outstanding pieces. Granted, Marvin Harrison, Demaryius Thomas in his prime, Emmanuel Sanders, Dallas Clark, whatever, great players.
Yes, I agree with that.
But
you have to look at what the Colts. Last episode we did say we think they make the playoffs, but there are some teams that just don't really go out of their way too much than they're comfortable. They aren't willing to go outside their comfort zone to go get a really good player. Yeah. That's what it seems like to me. Before Manning went to the Broncos were the same way. They're kind of the same way now, although they are starting to make big moves, and I think that Drew Lock will be a good quarterback.
I don't.
How good, I don't know. You don't?
I don't. That's the story for another episode, because we're going to do off-season breakdowns.
All right, we'll cover that.
But I don't. I think there's potential. Put it that way.
All right. But before Manning went to the Broncos, they were the same way, where they didn't really grab any talent. So I do think that was part of it. However, another part of it was just that he was playing alongside the GOAT, or against the GOAT, I should say, and Tom Brady, and Tom Brady won.
That's fair.
Majority of their matchups in the playoffs.
Yeah,
there was you have to look at it. Wasn't it like how many years consecutively did they get to the AFC Championship game? It was a massive number. And over the past 20 years, it was an incredible number. So unless Manning had the support around him to get him a first or second seed, he was going to end up playing the Patriots in the playoffs, either in the AFC Championship or before, every single time. So that kind of, that was a big hindrance for him in terms of getting Super Bowls. If he played, and once again, this is a whole other theoretical situation. If Tom Brady didn't exist, Peyton Manning would be probably moving on to most of those Super Bowls in Tom Brady's place.
I think that's a good argument for Tom Brady being the greatest. Is you remove Tom Brady from the equation,
how many people would win Super Bowls?
All of a sudden, Eli Manning's a good quarterback.
Yeah, if Eli Manning doesn't get lucky with throws and instead actually beats a team legitimately because, Brady was absolutely demolishing, maybe people are viewed differently than they are viewed today because they wouldn't be playing against what most players view as an unstoppable force. I mean, you have 300. Let me point this out to people. You have 300-pound tackles and linebackers mic'd up on the sidelines or getting caught in mics on the sidelines, talking about how they're afraid of what Brady can do. Even now, that's a testament to how much Brady really kind of capped Peyton Manning, because there was not very many people who could stop him. People feared playing Tom Brady and the Patriots. That was just how it was.
Yeah.
And I think that if Peyton Manning doesn't have to play Tom Brady every year in the AFC Championship game or before, he'd be going on to a lot more AFC Championship games for the ones that he didn't get to the AFC Championship game in the first place to play the Patriots. And he'd be moving on to a lot more Super Bowls too, I think.
Yeah,
because there was no other quarterback. There was no other quarterback in the AFC East, or I shouldn't say AFC East, but no other quarterback in the AFC who really rivaled Manning. There was a reason why the Tom Brady-Peyton Manning rivalry was such a good rivalry to watch.
Yeah.
Because both were supremely talented quarterbacks. You don't get an all-time rivalry like that if you're dealing with a bad quarterback, if you're dealing with two bad quarterbacks. And honestly, I think that them playing each other hindered them from winning even more. Like if Peyton Manning didn't exist, I think Brady would have won more. Because who's going to stop Brady? Manning was his best competition.
Right.
You'd have to catch Brady and the Patriots on a bad day, and even then, that might not be enough.
Yeah.
And I think the same could be said for Manning if Tom Brady wasn't in the league, if he'd never played football. And that's a whole other alternate, but it sort of puts it in perspective. These guys played each other so many times that if they didn't have to play each other, they'd be moving on to the Super Bowl most of the time.
Yeah, Peyton Manning.
And both of them would have even more rings. So I think that Peyton Manning kind of just got unlucky in terms of the fact that he had to play at the same time and in the same conference as Tom Brady.
I mean, seriously, like you were saying earlier, Tom Brady. If you take Tom Brady off that list, or just take away some of his greatness, Joe Montana moves up. Peyton Manning might be better than Joe Montana. He gets a few more Super Bowls, maybe. He still had a over 5,000 yard passing season. He had 55 touchdowns in the season. That's ridiculous. Those are elite GOAT level stats. Anyways, who do you got at? Who do you have at? What's your
number 4?
Yeah, who do you have at 4?
I'll share my 4, then you share your 4, and then we'll discuss. At my number 4 spot, I thought really hard about this one, and I have to say Brett Favre.
Huh. So I don't have Brett Favre. Obviously, I have Tom Brady, Johnny Unitas, Joe Montana, Peyton Manning's my 4. We just talked about him, so we can talk.
Oh yeah, so Peyton Manning. Who was your third?
Joe Montana.
All right, I know you said it. I just forgot.
That's just because Johnny used it too. That's why.
Yeah. So my 4th spot, Brett Favre. I mean, you've already discussed why you have Manning at 4. I put Brett Favre on here because the dude was
tough,
very impressive to watch.
Tough.
He was an absolute gunslinger of a quarterback, which resulted in his interceptions being higher. But he'd win you games because of it. So it wasn't like he was Baker Mayfield interceptions where it cost them games. It was that every once in a while, Brett Favre would throw an interception, but in the process, he scored 4 touchdowns.
Right.
What really cements Brett Favre's position at number 4, the one thing that I can use to give as an example of why I think he's the 4th greatest of all time is it was the game after his father had died, and I think he scored. I remember watching the game. I think he scored 5 touchdowns,
something like that.
It was an incredible game to watch, especially given the context of the whole situation. it was truly impressive to see him do that. So I have to say that that's the number one reason why I say he's number 4.
Right.
Combined with the fact that he was a back-to-back MVP. He won a Super Bowl. I think when he retired, he had 3 MVPs, a Super Bowl. I mean, he had nearly taken the Vikings to another Super Bowl before they were, quote unquote, knocked out with Bountygate. And if that hadn't happened, I think he would have won another Super Bowl, which would have been the ultimate revenge on the Packers for replacing him and trading him to the Jets and not letting him choose where he goes.
Yeah.
Only to come back to Minnesota and win a Super Bowl.
Yeah.
Which would have been in a year where he was doing so incredible. Yeah. I mean, it was truly impressive.
I'm gonna add my 2 cents about Brett Favre, and then I'll go on to my number 5, just because my 5 spot relates.
Yeah, I mean, the fact that he went back to back MVP, and then the example that I just gave, he was a tough guy, and
yeah,
he played his entire career. I should say most of his career before the very minimalistic 2007 safety guidelines were put into place for quarterbacks. And for a gunslinger quarterback, that was pretty dangerous to do back then.
Yeah.
So he, I mean, there are always people who say he wasn't the best of leaders, sort of an Aaron Rodgers situation, but people, I feel, respected Brett Favre and his word a lot more because he was so supremely successful. In comparison to Aaron Rodgers, Brett Favre is a better quarterback. That's not a question. Yes. Aaron Rodgers isn't in my top 5 all time.
Neither for me. I think for me, the main reason I have Brett Favre out of my top 5, easily number 6, was because of who's at my number 5, which I'll say in a second. But my 2 cents about Brett Favre is he was a man on a mission his entire career. He had very few losing seasons with the Packers, with not the greatest wide receiver threats. He got traded away to the Jets in what was an extremely upsetting leave from the Packers. He played with the Jets, tried with the Jets, which shows that he cares about football and not just about getting paid. He wants to win.
He could and think about it. If he was a modern day quarterback, people would be applauding him for not giving up on the team and not trying to play hard. He truly did care about winning games for his team.
But I think what sets him apart, though, is that he went back to a division rival and dominated.
Yes, exactly.
But I think the biggest reason that he isn't in my top 5 is because I'm going to go on to my number 5 now, by the way, is because of Dan Marino.
See, I have Dan Marino my number 5 spot.
Okay, so let me tell you about Dan Marino real quick. No Super Bowls, but there are great quarterbacks that don't have Super Bowls. Russell Wilson is a prime example.
I think Dan Marino's the Russell Wilson.
Wait, hold on.
Russell Wilson won the Super Bowl.
Yeah, no, Matt Stafford. Matt Stafford.
Oh, okay. Slip of the tongue.
Yeah. So, here's my 2 cents about Dan Marino. Very tough NFL at the time. Obviously, if you're going to be a great quarterback, you have to beat the greats. But he did what he could with minimal supporting cast. And he, what I think, had the best season, stats-wise, from a quarterback. His 1984 season was spectacular. 5,084 passing yards, 108.9 QBR, led the Dolphins, of all teams, to a 14-2 record, was the AFC champion, but lost to the Niners in the Super Bowl. I think it's hard to look at that stat line and the consistency in his career, or relative consistency in his career, and say that he's a bad quarterback. QBR was fairly high for his time. His completion percentage was pretty low, but that doesn't take away from the fact that he was an elite level quarterback.
See, now the fact that both of us have Dan Marino on our list at number 5, we're going to get a lot of Saints fans asking why we didn't have Drew Brees on this list.
Super Bowl rings.
Even though he had a ring.
I feel like this is going to be brought up in every episode.
Yeah. Dan Marino is the only quarterback who doesn't have a Super Bowl who should be considered for a top 5 all-time great quarterback.
Mm-hmm. I agree. He had a winning record in his career. The Dolphins were like a roller coaster with Dan Marino.
Yes.
And that's not because of Dan Marino's bad play. Dan Marino had pretty good stats.
No, Dan Marino was the only consistent part.
Exactly. That's why the Dolphins had that winning record.
Here's the thing for Saints fans on why Drew Brees didn't make the greatness list. I know this is hard for all of you to understand because this has been a big upsetting point for you that has made the news multiple times because the Saints fans love to play victim. The simple fact of the matter is that I don't really look at Drew Brees' ring and say, man, that was a convincing ring. For reasons that we've discussed in previous episodes and ones that I'm going to explain now, the fact that he knowingly allowed Bountygate to take place and didn't say anything, regardless of whether or not he regrets it now or admits it now, it was still the fact that he, allowed that to happen. It tainted his whole ring. If he was legitimate in winning those rings, he'd be number 5. Probably. I'd probably say he's number 5.
He's 7 for me. I know we're only doing top 5, but he's 7.
Yeah. But Drew Brees isn't on this list because besides that, Matthew Stafford may get the crap for being stat padding, even though that's not true because he's actually just carrying his team because he's the only offensive guy that can really put up points besides Matt Prater. Drew Brees is the definition of padding stats. Remember the game where he, what was it this year? Wasn't it 5 touchdowns so that he could break the all-time passing touchdown record?
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah. He, not only did he not have to run up the score like that to get the 5 touchdowns that he got, because it did feel a bit run-up-ish that he then later paraded around the field and they took a timeout so he could parade around the field. Come on. When you celebrate the fact that you're getting good stats on field, like, yes, if you naturally get it, like you throw 2 touchdowns in a game, but the second touchdown you throw breaks the record, or you go off for a game in a game that you need to go off in, like a really high point game, it's back and forth, and you score 5 touchdowns, that's impressive because you're fighting a battle while also breaking a record. It wasn't a battle for him to get that extra touchdown. It was so bad with the stat padding that the Saints fans booed the refs when they pulled back the touchdown, which I don't think they should have. I think they should have let that touchdown stand. But it got so bad that even the Saints fans wanted him to pad the stats. That's the definition of stat padding. That's the definition right there. His numbers are inflated because he's always been in the passing system. He's always played in the dome. People are like, oh, well, his passing yards and passing touchdowns are better than Brady's. By nothing. Like, by less than a season's margin. This season, Tom Brady could pass him in touchdown passes and passing yards. That's how small of a margin he has.
Exactly.
Not an impressive margin.
But that's not to say that Drew Brees isn't good. No,
that's not to say he isn't good. But it is to say that stats alone should not be getting you into the all-time list. And when you have a suspect Super Bowl ring on top of it, it doesn't really help you because that's the only Super Bowl. It's the only controversy, or it's the only gate that the NFL has ever conclusively proved without covering up evidence, or having the second highest level court in the country rule that it's not their place to rule on it, even though they think that the individual in question is innocent. For Tom Brady with the Deflategate, which was blown out of proportion anyway because it was literally described by a Jets fan physics professor from Harvard that it was just natural deflation of the footballs. Right. And the second highest court in the country only ruled that Tom Brady suspension would be upheld is because it was the NFL's choice on how to punish their players in regards to supposed cases of in-game cheating. So that's why right there, Saints fans. Drew Brees is a really good quarterback, but he isn't top 5 because he's played 9 out of, what is it? Like, I think it was some incredibly high number. He plays all of his home games, and so 8 games, plus another game with Falcons, who are in a dome. I think there's another team in that division. It's not the Buccaneers that have a dome. Actually, it might not even be in their division.
Yeah, it's not in the division. It's only the Falcons and Saints.
So he plays at best.
At least. At least 9 games.
He gets at least 9 games
Inside.
in a dome. Not to mention the fact that he's been very lucky for a lot of his years where he's gotten to play at more stadiums that have domes.
Well, that's also, I think Atlanta Stadium can open at the top, actually, if I'm not mistaken.
But they keep it closed most of the time. I've never seen that thing open, except for when they closed it. But right before, no, I've never seen it open. Never mind. But then consider this: Tom Brady, who has, like I said, less than a season's worth of yards and touchdowns behind Brees. So if Brees has absolutely the best advantage here, and he still is only marginally ahead of Tom Brady, and Brady is always at best, all right, because his home games, all of them are outside in what I would say is a terrible environment to play football. Because if you've ever been on the East Coast, specifically Massachusetts, New England, in the winter, there's a lot of snow. It's very cold. It's very windy. And he has those numbers. And then you get to the fact that I think every team in his division has an open stadium. Think about that. That's you have your 8 home games. You have your in-division games where he's getting another 3. That's 11 games at a minimum that he's going to be playing outside. Think about that. That's a pretty big disparity right there. Think about if he was throwing inside. His numbers wouldn't get worse. Tom Brady's numbers outside are actually one of the best in the league. I think they're the best, actually, in terms of completion percentage, touchdowns thrown, passing yards thrown, all that. He's one of the best outdoor quarterbacks. And his play gets better when he's inside. So think about how much better he would have been statistically, not talking Super Bowls, because obviously he's the best there. Think about how much better he would have been statistically if he did that. And he played inside at least games. So that's why Drew Brees is on this list. So that's it for me.
That's it for me.
Anything else to add?
No, that's it.
I mean
appreciate you
that's
guys listening.
Yeah. So listen, guys. If Drew Brees wins another Super Bowl, he'll be on this list. Dan Marino will drop down to 6th. Simple as that. He isn't going to win another Super Bowl. That's just how it is. The Saints are cursed. They've lost their window of opportunity. They've had it for 3 years, and they blame the refs.
Certainly,
one of those.
Certainly not with Tom Brady in the division either. So.
Yeah, certainly not with Tom Brady in your division, with one of the most stacked offenses I've ever seen, and a decent defense. So yeah. And before you guys all complain about the no flag pass interference, yes, that was bad. But did you really have to go around the league getting people to sign your petition like some sort of 6th grader who was upset with the lunch cafeteria food? Like, come on. Come on. Your petition made the NFL worse and filled it with so much controversy the whole season every time the refs refused to overturn a call that it gave me literal heart problems.
Hey, no one knows playoff misery more than a Chicago Bears fan. Simple as that.
Exactly. You guys got Drew Brees, and you guys were a decent team you've always been a decent team since you've had Drew Brees. Be appreciative of that. Us Lions fans who have been screwed over way more than you have, by the way. didn't really appreciate your whole petition campaign because it kind of came off as you guys being the biggest softies in the NFL. Thank you very much. Make sure you guys like, comment, and subscribe, and follow us at Unrestricted Sports in our social media down below. And we will see you guys in the next episode.
See you next time.